Okay everyone, this is a quick summary of the form and structure in our nature sequence. And we're going to start just by quickly recapping the difference between form and structure. So by form, we mean the pattern that the poem follows. And it might be written in a particular form like a sonnet, where we're looking at a certain number of lines, stanzas, and a particular meter or rhythm in the poem. So beats per line, for example. You might know that in sonnets, a poet will write an iambic pentameter, so 10 beats. The structure is much more open, and it is just the order or sequence of images, ideas, lines in the poem. And the first thing to note, and we'll begin with the prelude, is just thinking about the commonalities, the links we can make between poems. And note that considering this anthology is Power and Conflict, that most of the poets we're looking at have broken with tradition in some way. We don't see an awful lot of consistency in form. We see unusual forms, or forms that break the mould in some way. So we might remember just the basics in terms of form, that the prelude is an epic, which does not mean incredible, just means that it's a long narrative poem. And also, let's wait until this resets. And also that it is written in blank verse, which just means unrhymed iambic pentameter. So it's fairly consistent in terms of its rhythm, but it doesn't rhyme. And what that gives us is a slightly more conversational or natural tone to the poem. What I think is really worth considering is how we link the form and structure to our overall message. And in this instance, it's worth bringing it back into that big idea in the poem that this is all about a rite of passage. And so we want it to feel personal. We want it to feel like Wordsworth, like we're sharing the experience with Wordsworth as we go through, or with the narrator at least. And in terms of the structure, it's very simple for this poem. It is a journey, and it builds. So you can think of it, if you like, almost in three parts. We have the beginning, where we have excitement at the beauty of nature. We have the middle, where we have the shock, the fear of that huge peak on the horizon, representing his future, or death, or the supernatural. And then finally his reflection, where we jump in time and think about him in shock for weeks at a time. And we could compare this to any of the other poems. So let's take Exposure as our next one. And this one, unlike the rest that we're going to look at now, is actually fairly consistent. So you do have in this poem a consistent rhyme scheme throughout. And you do have set stanzas of 5 lines. So it is a little bit more restrained in some ways, but where it's interesting, where we get to our actual point, is where Owen chooses to break with this. So although we do have a rhyme scheme, it is irregular. Meaning that Owen chooses regularly to throw in beats that don't quite work. And similarly with the stanzas, yes, it's true that we have set number of lines per stanza, but in each one we have a refrain. Nothing happens. That sticks out at the end. It's a different length, it doesn't seem to belong. And so what we get when we bring all of this together, linking into the themes of the poem, we get firstly monotony, so the idea that it's consistent and predictable and boring, but at the same time, as the poem explores, not always. We also get regular, minor shocks. And of course, what that leads us to in the trenches is madness. Never having any real change, but being in a constant cycle of expecting death, but nothing happens. In terms of the structure of the poem, well, that's a good way to think of it immediately, that it is a little bit like a cycle as we go through, that it sort of ebbs and flows, rises and falls, safety, fear, safety, fear. But I think it is also worth considering that firstly, we begin with the powerful image of the winds that knife us. And we end on that sort of very forlorn image of the soldiers digging out their comrades and their frozen, dead eyes. So I'd focus on those two things as well. Next one, Storm on the Island. Well, again, some strong comparisons with the Prelude, in that it's another poem that's written in blank verse. So loose iambic pentameter. And again, so comparing it to Exposure, for example, you've got some interesting comparisons. So you've got firstly the fact that, again, we have sort of a slightly irregular meter. So although it's loosely blank verse, Heaney uses enjambment and caesura to highlight these moments of shock where we get a blast from the wind. And we also get, to compare it to Exposure again, a bit of a cycle. We feel like as we go through, they're preparing themselves for the storm, and we end on that sort of, it is a huge nothing. As if this is just the eternal, inevitable cycle that they're going through. Not unlike Exposure. And then finally, we have Checking Out My History. In terms of the structure for this one, we have the idea that, as we've said in class, AGOD opens with conflict and betrayal. So we begin with them, they're telling me, and we end with the hopeful image of the narrator having to carve out his own identity. And in terms of the form of the poem, well, this is the loosest of all of them. It's written in what we call free verse, meaning that there is no consistent rhyme scheme, meter, set of stanzas. But what we do have that's really important in Checking Out My History is that division, the two voices in the poem. The fairy tale where we get that soft assonance of, the cow jumping over the moon, the fake history, and then interrupting it far more aggressively, Toussaint de Thorn, we have the real history.